Hello, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us live or watching this afterwards. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. We're going to get independent insights from our team here at ECO from the 44th board meeting of the Green Climate Fund. It's my pleasure to welcome the team here today, my colleagues Zsofia Kovacs, Clare Wingfield, and Abiyadan Salako. Great to be here with you all to have this discussion. Welcome. For 26 years, our consultants have supported and guided our clients to achieve low carbon, climate resilient development. We do this through our 7 services. We catalyze systemic transformation to establish strong foundations for impact. And we've mobilized over $5.6 billion from the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, in the past decade, keen to support and with increased access to climate finance for our GCF stakeholder community. So if you followed us for some time, you'll appreciate that our experts deliver incisive analysis. It's rooted in extensive experience with GCF programming and project development and design. We are really working on the ground in projects day to day. And this strong foundation allows us to offer you insights that you need to gauge the current mood of the GCF community, to stay abreast of critical developments and where things are going. If there's anything you'd like us to cover specifically in these debriefs, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. You can connect with me and the team on LinkedIn. We have email address inquiries@ecoltdgroup.com. We'll post that all around, and you can find it from our website as well. Anyway, without further ado, let's get going. So we'll just have some quick intros, starting with me. I think many of you know me. Great to see you here, Pradeep. Please do introduce yourself in the chat, as Pradeep has done here. Now, my background is as an engineer, but for 30 years, I've been working in creating markets for sustainable energy and to address climate change in developing countries and in emerging economies. I'm the founder of ECO. I established it back in March 2000, so we are now just more than 26 years old. And over that time, I've been working to identify opportunities, barriers from technical and financial standpoint, and to identify framework conditions in terms of policy, regulatory environment, institutional conditions, capacity, and awareness of key stakeholders in the climate finance world. My key focus right now is to build our training and capacity building community through the ECO Institute. We're going to, we've got a fascinating agenda. We're going to first be focusing in on our GCF Insight report that was developed by my colleague Abiyadan Salako. He's a writer here at ECO. You can download the report from the QR code that's on your screen now. This edition, which Abiyadan authored, and with collaboration with me and with my colleague Ellie Latrobe Hogan, this investigates capacity building within climate finance. It's got lots of fascinating insights here, and she'll appreciate the discussion. So, this report Abiyadan will present, and after that we'll be unpacking key issues that emerged from the 44th meeting of the Green Climate Fund Board meeting. The meeting was attended by my colleague Zsofia, who'll be speaking with us, and watched very carefully by Clare as well, in terms of what were the developments. And both Zsofia and Clare worked on projects that were approved at that board meeting. they'll have some really fascinating insights. That board meeting took place between the 25th and the 28th of March in Songdo in South Korea. Please do participate as we go along. Really looking forward to hearing from you. Introduce yourself, write your comments in the chat, submit your questions in the comments, and we'll do our very best to address them. We'll also be sending out the webinar replay kit. Sign up to our latest Thinking newsletter to receive it. We've got the link here. Just follow that QR code, sign up, and you'll get all of our newsletters, including the replay kit from this event. So let's get going with our first agenda item. Vierdan is a climate writer here at ECO. Vierdan, why don't you give us a brief introduction of yourself? Tell us about yourself.
Thank you so much, Grant. Hello, everybody. Really glad to have you all here. I am Abiodun Salako, a writer at ECO. I'm based in Nigeria, and I've been a communications professional, journalist, and writer focusing on sustainability and development for the past 5 years. I usually contribute articles, audiovisual discussions, and communications that touch on development, politics, education, and of course, climate change in Nigeria and the broader context of Africa. I'm also an alumnus of the African Liberty Writing Fellowship, and I'm co-shaping a data intelligence and news platform for Africa's energy landscape.
Presentation on the please, thank you. Please do go ahead with your presentation on the GCF Insight.
Thank you so much for that, Grant. Again, welcome everybody. And for the 31st GCF Insight, we wanted to look at capacity building models for climate finance readiness within the ecosystem. And we had 4 guiding questions in quotes, right? And they are the institutional or individual challenges affecting climate finance training as a capacity building element to achieve their mandate. And we wanted to find out what extent does readiness support address systemic constraints, including mandate clarity, staffing levels, and coordination mechanisms and retention incentives as well. And they wanted to see how climate finance capacity building models could evolve from one-off interventions based on continuous learning ecosystems, and what are the practical pathways that exist and to improve knowledge retention, institutional embedding, and long-term climate finance performance. And for this report, we had different approach, 2 primary data sources, which were interviews and a survey. And for that interviews, we had about 8 people that we spoke to, which are the GCF developers across the ecosystem. And then we also had a survey of over 56 participants, and they spoke to us about their issues or their challenges in relation to capacity building. And then we had a comprehensive analysis where we looked at the UNFCCC, where we looked at the World Bank, and we pulled some of those writings from there. And then we also banked on the eco consultancy expertise to finalize what this approach was going to be about. And so now we'll move on to one of the most important questions, if not the most important one. What are the barriers to climate finance training use among practitioners? And this is basically on the individual aspect. And what was so interesting was that we found a workload barrier, we found a headspace barrier, we found a time and a resources barrier. And 46% of accredited entities did talk about workload as a primary barrier to applying climate finance training, even after they've completed the training. Their daily workload could not afford them the headspace to be able to apply the theory to the practical aspect of things. And then we had 67% of NDAs on focal points report time constraints highly affect their ability to apply what they also learned. And interestingly, 71% of independent consultants identified a lack of budget as a barrier to applying their training. What we saw across this data, particularly for the barriers, was that training had occurred, but the conditions necessary for that training to materialize itself on the ground was not particularly, was not happening. It wasn't created at a particular time. And so we went ahead to ask them, so what support or improvement would you like to see from your institution to help you effectively apply what you've taken from that learning? And we saw that some of them there was a really huge call for greater financial and institutional resources. And they talked about increased funding, additional staff with financial expertise, and more structured institutional backing. Some of them called for an enhanced capacity building and practical implementation support, such as applied training, regular workshop, and access to reward data, so they could know what is happening in present time and relate that to the training or the capacity building endeavor that they're going to undergo. And then we had a bit of cross-cutting needs, which respondents looked at protected time for them to be able to apply the training they had undergone, reduce workload pressures, clearer guidance, which could be in form of tools and log frames, and then a formal platform for peer exchange. So what's happening here is we now ask them, what do you truly want from training? What are the methods that you find to be most effective for you and will be so important on your job for you to deliver? One of the first things was they wanted a hands-on simulation. So they wanted to learn by doing and not by having a passive webinar or a self-paced session. And what this means for them is that they wanted to be in a space where they could have access to the moment they get the theory, they're able to practicalize it and test it in the field. And this could be quite guided. And that's why the second part we see in the structured support, where mentorship and peer learning networks bridge the reflection gap. Because when there's mentorship, there's somebody that you're reporting to that is guiding your processes as you take in the learning to be able to use it in the field. And a couple of them, they speak about, importantly, context-specific content. They found out that some of the content for the trainings were not local to their own situations or their own challenges. And this is particularly across SIDS and LDCs, which have peculiar issues that you don't really find in sort of like umbrella training modules or curriculum, where you will not find anything specific. So what they wanted was to have context-specific content that could enable them connect to the particular training and be able to use the tools from that training in their work. And then they talked about reflection and feedback, and they wanted a mechanism that could help them navigate the constantly evolving world of the climate finance ecosystem. So that was the four important things that the practitioners talked about that they wanted to see reflect in climate finance training across the capacity building ecosystem. So we had the interviews across key actors, right? And we wanted to ask them, so what do you think are the issues? And then what do you think could be the solutions? And they talked about human capacity, human capital capacity, particularly across SIDS and LDCs. And one of the most important things was they tried to differentiate that it is not that there is a lack of expertise. The expertise is available, but what is not available is that we don't have the necessary manpower. In many situations, the manpower is not particularly there for us to be able to effectively deliver what we're supposed to deliver on. And then this also shifted to the technical aspect versus the organizational maturity. And because the organizational maturity has a very key aspect to play, particularly when the organization needs to look at its own ability to predictably achieve its objectives through established processes, leadership, and technology. And we looked at, so how can the organization ensure there's long-term retention of technical expertise? Because if an institution lacks the strategic plan or clear internal regulations, then it cannot provide the applied space necessary for a practitioner to utilize their training. And then we move on to where they talked about the systemic and political hurdles. So we both know that these institutions do not operate in a vacuum, and there's always the political aspect of things. So if there's a change in political mandate, it could significantly affect the institution itself. So for example, the head of one of the institutions could be taken away from that particular part, or some executive members could be taken away from the particular aspect. And what that means is there's a space, there's a gap there. That training has already gone because the systemic hurdles has already occurred, and then the people have left. So there's a space to fill again from the scratch, because we're seeing that these political hurdles of that particular country particularly can affect how the institutions sort of operate. And there's also the evolving donor requirements, which we are all aware of, that international finance rules actually are frequently updated. And by the time the long process of working on a particular project elapses, there could have already been a new update to an international finance rule. And what that means is that it's time has been lost, resources have been lost, and they may have to predominantly start again. So they talked about the evolving donor requirement as one of the barriers that they are facing. And then when we look at the solutions they happed upon, learning by doing, tops number one. And then the mentorship and embedded advisory is also part of the things that they are looking at. And they also spoke about the training of trainers approach, which basically scales capacity by ensuring the advisors are turning into champions within the particular regions. And what this does is it builds the confidence of these champions through coaching, and then organizations can create a reverberation of knowledge transfer that extends well beyond the individual. And then they also talked about the contextual relevance, which we've seen that the survey also talked about. What is the contextual relevance of that particular training model? Does it speak to the real life situation or the context of that particular region? If it's in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, or in any country in Africa, does it speak to that particular area? And how important is it? Because they have to learn from what is happening in real time and be able to deliver such solutions in real time. And so based on all of the data we were able to pull from the surveys and of course from the interviews, we came up with a few recommendations. And one of that is to move from theory to applied learning. And this means workshops. This means having them walk through writing a real proposal. This means post-training mentorship, not leaving a space, a vacuum when you've delivered the knowledge, but they don't have anybody to consult with in using that knowledge because of the real-time impact of that. So because things are changing, there's involvement. So how, when there's a training they've taken and they're trying to use it on the field and something has changed, they have nobody to go back to say, oh, A, B, and C as a chord, this is what we are facing right now. How do we tweak this particular thing to work to suit this particular issue we're handling? The second part is we'll need to build institutional capacity. So we need to create succession plans for focal points, and we need to establish climate finance units. And they will also need to close the workload gap, which is mandating protected learning time, and to bolster peer communities, and also to consider embedded advisor clusters. Another one is to strengthen regional and peer ecosystems, which is to facilitate south-to-south knowledge exchange, widen scope to expand CSOs, NGOs, academia, and of course the private sector. And the last one is to improve training design and delivery, because we've realized that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all program. It's just not possible because different regions have peculiar challenges. Therefore, we need to have role-specific modular content, particularly for this particular for those countries or those regions. And then we also need to have the buy-in of the senior leaders for them to know what is happening, and for them to understand why this is what should be done. And this means having executive briefings for senior leaders so they can have that buy-in as well. I think you find that there are many more solutions and barriers and the way forward in this particular report. So I just concluded that, just a summary of the data, but it's quite interesting to have found all of this from the ecosystem, some people in the ecosystem, from practitioners and from the institutional point of view. So thank you so much for your attention. I would like you all to scan through the QR code, and you'll find a full insight there on the 31st GCF Insight. We had such an amazing time working on it. I'm sure you find it quite useful. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like to share some feedback or if you'd like to continue the discussion. I'll now hand the baton back to Grant.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abiodun. Great presentation as well. What really stood out for you as the most, I guess, surprising thing or key insight for you that you had during this work?
Thank you so much for that, Grant. So I think one of the most important things that stood out for me was the fact that we seem to be having training sessions or capacity building sessions that are not particularly context specific. I think it defeats the entire purpose of trying to build capacity. Because if you want to build capacity for any institution, you need to ensure that it's peculiar to the challenges they are facing. It cannot be the same kind of challenge across Eastern Europe, for example, to countries in Africa or countries in the Caribbean or the Pacific. So perhaps it's one of the most important things that stood out to me was we need to have more context-specific training modules that is very much important for these people to be, for the practitioners and also for the institutions to be abreast of.
Yeah. For me, that connects very strongly to the idea that you gave as well in terms of the mentorship and the wish for people to have that hands-on learn by doing, because context specific is really about applying what I'm hearing to my situation. I feel it goes way beyond saying, we're doing training in the Middle East, let's do case study from the Middle East, or we're doing something in the Caribbean, let's do a case study for the Caribbean. I think it goes beyond that into how actually am I tackling this content and applying it hands-on, and being able to chat with someone about it specifically. Here's the situation. How do I address that?
I do quite agree with that. And that also speaks to the real time development of how these trainings can change. So we could have a case study which could bring out the reality of the particular issue. But if there's no space for mentorship, where as things are developing or evolving, we don't have anyone to consult with and say, this is what is happening, then how can we tweak the particular knowledge to suit the situation and to achieve the aim that we're going to achieve? Then I do believe it really doesn't, it is not strong enough, even if we have a case study, without mentorship. So mentorship is perhaps the most significant aspect they looked out for, because they didn't want to operate in a vacuum or feel a bit, once the knowledge has been dumped on them, that's pretty much it. They just go ahead and find a way to tweak it themselves. So it's very interesting that you brought that up in terms of mentorship.
Yeah, fantastic. Great report. Encourage everyone to read it. And as you will have seen and heard from Abidan's presentation and from our report, the bottleneck in climate finance isn't just a lack of good ideas, or perhaps isn't even a lack of good ideas. Rather, it's what I sometimes call the capability wall. We see so many promising proposals that get stuck in some form of rejection loop because they lack the technical rigor required for bankability. And to make matters worse, we're all dealing with moving goalposts. GCF requirements, programming standards evolve all the time, and that so quickly. And we're working on some projects that started development in 2023, 2022, and so much has changed since then. So the goalposts move all the time, and one-off training is often outdated by the time the session ends, or even before it even starts. So we're building the Eco Institute to address this issue and see capacity building as a system, not just passive knowledge. If training doesn't help you actually get the work done, it's just adding to your team's workload. That's why we've built this training platform. We're seeing it as a portfolio accelerator. We're building on the 25 years of practitioner experience we have, the kind that secured so much funding from GCF, from the GEF Adaptation Fund, and other funds. We're using that knowledge to help produce while you learn. And that's why we call it the learn, do, review system. Really, learn being your team gains access to the core information, real world experience, and knowledge that you need. The do, you don't just watch something passively, but you work on priority projects, live projects like pins. You're working on concept notes. Depending on the fund, you might be targeting private sector, you might be targeting one of the public large funds. So working on that as part of the curriculum. The review part of it, the idea is that you can receive direct technical feedback, work in surgeries, work on live sessions, mentorship embedded in it. And perhaps even alongside this, write shops or experiential learning in country. Try to build that into a whole ecosystem there. So the most important of your long-term strategy is that organizational seats are institutional, not individual. So if an organization is signed up for this or an NDA, it's possible to pass those seats along during the subscription period. We want to show you exactly how this converts into a stronger pipeline for the future. So on the 26th of May, we're going to be hosting a live interactive session, and my colleagues have just put on a QR code for that session. If you follow that QR code through, you'll find a sign up page there. And to join that session, where we'll be diving into more on this GCF Insight results and running a masterclass featuring some of our content from the project development modules. So sign up there. There are a few little buttons to click. It's going to look, let me see if I can quickly share my screen for this. So it's going to look like this when you enter the page. If you scroll down, you can choose your session. We've got a UK morning session and a UK evening session that you can, afternoon session that you can join, so that people right from the Pacific to the Americas can easily join these. You click on enroll, you'll get a little pop-up to register for free for that particular session. And then over here, if you're not already signed up to the Eco Institute, you'll click on the Create Account button to set up your account. And it's as simple as that. We'll email you the links and everything like that once you've signed up. So please do that. We'd love to see you there. All right. So we're going to move forward now with our agenda. And thank you very much, Abiyadan. Really appreciate your input. And this is a fantastic report, a fantastic presentation. I'm now joined by Zsofia Kovacs and Clare Wingfield. Zsofia is a principal consultant. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work to get started?
Thank you, Grant. Hello, everyone. I'm Zsofia Kovacs. I'm an economist by background, and I've been working in climate finance, infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and private sector development in the past 20 years. I'm currently at ECO. I'm leading the private sector practice, and I've been focusing on program design, fund design, impact measurement, and evaluations as well at ECO, having worked with clients like multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, impact investors, asset managers, and foundations as well. So quite a broad client group since I joined ECO back in 2024.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Zsofia is joined here in this little panel by Clare Wingfield. Clare, brief introduction from your side.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Clare. I've been with ECO just over 4 years. I'm a senior consultant. I lead the climate finance area for ECO. I'm also part of the private sector practice team with Zsofia. Like you, Grant, I have an educational background in engineering, but also climate science. And I worked for just over 15 years in the private sector and financial services area before moving across into more of the climate finance space, where I now specialize in designing blended finance and climate finance projects. Look forward to delving into the detail of the B.44. Thanks.
Fantastic. Yeah, let's just jump straight in it. So I'll hand over to both of you. Please let us hear some key insights from the event.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. I will kick it off. I attended the event, the board meetings in person in Songdo a few weeks ago. So it's always a great experience being there in person. and learning all the invaluable insights on the grant. It's always very helpful for us consultants as we are working with our clients on funding proposals, concept notes, accreditation processes. So learning all these first-hand insights and meeting with GCF colleagues there is always the best way to be up to date on everything related to strategy and processes and so on. So I just I will kick off with giving a few highlights and some information on the strategic direction of the GCF in the coming months and next few board meetings. And then I will hand over to Claire to talk about the actual funding proposals that were approved during this board. There were 18 of them, and 3 of them were supported by ECO. So it was an extremely rewarding experience being there in person and seeing this through, having worked with our clients for many months or even years in some cases. So we start with the highlights. So one of the highly anticipated discussions and decision at this board was it was about the regional offices. So if you have been following us, we've been talking about the decentralization process at the GCF that has been going on for a few months, or I think starting in 2024 now. The regional offices and sub-regional offices have been set up, but they were all based in Songdo, so the team were still based there. But the new development is that now these teams will be moving out to physical offices in the coming year. So I think the plan is to have the first office established by 2027. And these 5 actually more than 5 offices. So there's one in Panama for Latin America and the Caribbean. There will be an office in Jordan, in Amman, for Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East. Africa will have 2 offices, so one in Nairobi in Kenya and another one in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. And Asia and Pacific, we also have 2 offices, one smaller sub-regional office in Fiji for the Pacific, and then the Songdo office, or the headquarters, will remain to oversee the Asia programming. So, as I mentioned, it was highly anticipated because there were quite a lot of countries who put forward proposals to secure this GCF office, and also the team are actually physically moving out to these offices. So this is why it was really highly anticipated by everyone. So it's I could feel it on when I was there in person. Other topics that were discussed were about increasing the impact of the GCF, so deploying innovative financial instruments to drive paradigm shift in climate action, which is always the mandate of the fund, which means increasing the approvals at scale. So by now, I think that with this round of funding proposal approved, GCF has reached USD 20 billion investment allocate, or not yet dispersed, but approved. Implementation or disbursement is actually lagging, so it's another target for the GCF to make sure that they will be able to catch up. So there are lots of operational reforms that I'm also going to talk about that will help speeding up this process. They want to expand the reach of the projects and the programs. Mobilizing private capital is equally important. The GCF has a private sector strategy, and it's about 1/3. At this last board, I think 1/3 of the projects, so 6 out of 18, have been allocated to private sector accredited entities or PSAs, project-specific approach applicants, and empowering local actors. So all the direct access entities that have been accredited in this last round, and all the intention of the GCF of building their capacities on the ground in the countries that are the recipient countries. It all means that GCF really wants to increase impact in these countries and generate the projects, ideas, and concepts from the countries and by them. So lots of operations reforms have been taking place in the past few boards, but there's been a process of simplifying the access to these GCF funding and investment. GCF wants to restructure the board committee slightly to make sure that this decision-making process will facilitate the faster approval process. There was recently, I think the last board, we also talked about this new accreditation framework that was approved and is now operational. So we have to see how simplified or how faster it will be, but it's certainly an intention from the GCF to make the accreditation process much more, much faster and allow to increase the number of accredited entities, including or even emphasizing direct access entities. The PSAA, so that was the project-specific accreditation approach pilot program for 3 years. It allowed applicants to apply for funding without being pre-accredited by the GCF. And this process is currently under review, so it has been extended by the end of 2027 in terms of approval. So the last PSA project will be approved at the last board in 2027. There's also some efficiency improvements that are on the way, rolling out the GCF partner portal, which will improve the funding proposal process. This concept note is already a slightly improved process, or it's an online process now. The same will happen with the funding proposals. Advisory panel reforms are also underway. So and another sometimes disputed or rather difficult process is the no objection letter country ownership in the by the national designated authorities. This process will be reviewed in the next board or the next and the refined country ownership guidelines will be presented. So this is yet to be seen, but there was a mention about this. So it will be more information will come out of this in the next round of the next board meetings. And finally, just a bit of information about the roadmap. So to the GCF to GCF3. So we are currently in the second programming period. 2028 and 31 will be GCF3, which also means that there's the replenishment. So the pledges are going to be soon be underway. But for that, before that, there's a transition period when the GCF is working on aligning the current updated strategic plan USP2 to the current climate, both in terms of considering the global crisis that happened, the new UNFCCC targets that were accepted by many countries last year. So there's been that's the next few steps to basically to develop the strategic framework for to be able to start the next round of the replenishment at the next board. So I will stop here because I think the funding proposals will be a very interesting part of our presentation today. So I will hand over to Claire to talk about this.
Thanks, Zsofia. And yes, some interesting developments there from the board. So I wanted to just take everyone through a bit more detail about the specific projects that were approved, and also some of the ones that we worked on here at ECO. So firstly, just an overview of where the funding has gone. So in total, there was 960 million worth of funding that was approved. And to give you an idea of the scale of that, the GCF's got a target of 3 billion for the year. So well on the way to a third of those funds being deployed through those projects in B44. 18 projects were approved, and again, just to give you an idea, the pipeline at the end of last year was 46 projects, so a good chunk of those have now been approved. In terms of the regional split, as you can see, the majority, so nearly half of that funding is going to Africa. And actually a large portion of that was the largest project that was approved, nearly one of the biggest projects ever, but the largest project at B44 in particular was a $250 million USD project developed by the World Bank, and that was with Ascent Green, and it's a resilient energy access project across 21 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. There were also some first ever single country GCF projects for Chad and the Bahamas and Jamaica, which I'll talk a bit more about later because that was one that we developed. And specifically, the board was targeting LDC, so least developed countries, SIDS, so small island developing states, and Africa, as can be seen here. So in terms of the distribution by theme, you can see it's nearly sort of 50-50 between mitigation and adaptation, and that's very much the target of the GCF. So 8 of those projects were adaptation. So in nominal terms, it was a 52-48 split, but if you change that to sort of a grant equivalent view, so you can sort of really sort of compare apples for apples, actually, well over half, 56% of the funds went into adaptation, which is what we would sort of expect, as adaptation projects are more sort of grant oriented at this stage, although we are starting to see, as I'll explain later, some private equity funds delving more into adaptation type projects as well. So yes, some great adaptation projects that were on the portfolio, including ecosystem resilience for smallholder farmers in Chad, agricultural resilience in Zambia, early warning systems in Armenia, and some food security and nature-based solutions projects as well. So really promising to see those come through. And to show you some trends over the last 4 years, so the share of adaptation projects has risen by 10%, going from 49% to 59% across the whole portfolio. So there's definitely seeing a trend there of more focus on adaptation. So then looking at who applied and who got the funding, so there was quite a nice split between direct access entities, so 7 proposals submitted by those, 6 from international access entities and 6 from the PSAA, so the project specific assessment approach applicants. Nevertheless, sort of 77% of the actual funds went to the international access entities, presumably because they have more sort of financial capacity to manage those larger sums of money. But interestingly, they're nice to see some new applicants as well. So there were 2 first-time direct access entities, KCB and Koika, and 2 international ones, including ACTED and Enable. Okay, so then looking at the types of financial instruments. So, historically, grants and loans have represented the majority, and we're still sort of very much seeing that as being the case. So over 50% of the financial instruments are grants. And what we have seen is that equity is growing, and we're seeing a diversification of those financial instruments. And interestingly, equity is now the most requested non-grant instrument coming forward for GCF money. So that is definitely a growing area. Guarantees remain the smallest component. But I would expect to see that change as well. So these de-risking type instruments will become more important, and we're seeing a bit more interest from that from some of our clients as well. So I think there is a shift slowly moving away from grants and loans, and we started to see that a bit at this board, particularly as the GCF looks to sort of innovative financial structures that unlock private capital. And then just looking at ECO's impact at this board, so we were really proud to see 3 of our proposals get approved. So I just wanted to run you through those 3 projects quickly. So the first one was the Navis Decarbonisation Fund. So this was one project that I led. And this is a private equity fund accelerating small and medium-sized enterprises, particularly in the decarbonisation sector in Southeast Asia, and they followed the PSAA approach. But although they are a decarbonisation fund, it was really nice to see some cross-cutting projects in their pipeline, particularly looking at water security and energy resilience. So great to see the private sector investing in more of those adaptation type investments. And it was praised by the ITAP at GCF, so the Independent Technical Advisory Panel, for being first of its kind climate-focused equity fund in the region, with particularly strong ESG and climate KPI focus there. So that was great. So they did have good ESG outcomes, and not just looking at financial outcomes in the fund. And particularly that was sort of involved in the sort of the carry terms of the general partners. So really great to see that come through. And then the second one was City Capital, the Asia fund. So this was another private equity fund addressing climate finance in Central Asia. Again, another PSAA applicant. And it's the GCF's first ever equity investment in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. What's particularly nice about this one as well is they did have, again, some adaptation or cross-cutting projects in their pipeline, particularly looking at climate-smart agriculture and irrigation. And like Navis, they have a strong sort of technology transfer component and knowledge transfer component. So they're looking to grow these companies. They have seats on the board, and they help to improve the operationalization of the firms. So there's a great deal of sort of ecosystem building and paradigm shift work going on in these companies as well. And then last but not least was Adapt Jamaica. So this was a public sector adaptation project that the team worked on, strengthening resilience of smallholder farmers and food systems in Jamaica. Great to see it being the first single country project for the country. And had a particular focus on responses through their Build Back Better response programme to the hurricanes, the most recent hurricanes over the last year or two, so Beryl and Melissa. So they had lots of interventions looking at hurricane responses and hurricane resistance initiatives and interventions across agriculture, food loss and waste, early warning systems, and a lot of training and capacity building through their farmers' field schools as well. And what's particularly impressive about this project is it has a really high reach, so the impact is going to reach over 1/4 of the population in Jamaica. So yeah, really great to see those 3 approved. And yeah, look forward to hearing of any questions. Back to you, Grant. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Claire. Great to see those projects and the portfolio overview, and thank you, Zsofia, for those insights about where the GCF is heading. You mentioned that they're talking about adapting to the global crises, Zsofia. Was it all talked about in general abstract terms, or are they actually talking about something that the GCF needs to do at the moment related to it? And I guess, I mean, maybe no one wanted to actually say the words of exactly what the crises are, but I imagine it's partly the USAID situation, and partly the situation in the Middle East and Ukraine as well, although that's a long time conflict. Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And just before you answer, to reiterate, please do put in the chat if you're on YouTube, if you're on LinkedIn, put in any questions you have, and we'll be thrilled to address them now. So over to you, Zsofia.
Yeah, so the discussion, or it's also a discussion on the corridors, so the type of discussion was mainly on the impact of these crises on the amount of climate finance that are currently decreasing. So many countries overseas development assistance allocations have reduced in the past year and couple of years. So that has been quite. You could feel that being attention, and not least, obviously, the US withdrawal from the GCF. So the US is no longer a donor to the GCF, which also means that others. So there's an anticipation that others might step up, and they haven't. So there have been no pledges for GCF 3, so the third round of replenishment. But some of the member countries or donor countries confirmed their existing or recent pledges, like Germany and Italy. They both showed that they are still committed to keep up their contributions. But it's still yet to be seen, because it's going to be the next board meeting and the one after when these financial discussion will really take place. It's a bit unclear at this point of time which way it will go, but obviously that's the impact of these situations in around the world will definitely be felt, or was felt at this board.
Okay. Yeah, we saw the recent replenishment of the GEF reduced the amount from the previous replenishment by at least a third, if I'm not mistaken. So that doesn't really bode well for other countries stepping up, since everyone is turning inward to national priorities. Right? So, I mean, that's some of broad context there. On the other hand, there is really positive approval of projects that you were talking about, Claire. Great to see that, a wide range of projects being approved. From looking at that portfolio, I guess one of our projects, your answer might include one of our projects, but what really stood out for you in terms of overall trends, or are there signals we can pick up from where things are going? Looks like quite a healthy portfolio, doesn't it? Approved at this board meeting, Claire.
Yeah, I mean, actually, as part of my research for this, I was looking at some of the sort of the trends, and obviously, things may change with the next replenishment cycle. But in 2023, the board approved 2.1 million. 2024, it was 2.6 million, and last year it was just over 3 billion. So to see sort of B.44 committing almost half as much as it did in the entire year of 2023 is really promising. I think one of the things I picked up on was a real focus on direct access entities. So nice to see more of those coming through, more local ownership. So I think there's going to be more of that sort of country ownership and shift to sort of really ensuring that the impacts are sort of designed locally, and that the sort of finance that is mobilised is really impactful from a local perspective. And then secondly, of course, is this sort of shift towards sort of equity, so moving away from grants and loans. And I think the GCF is really trying to look at, and will have to increasingly, I believe, have to look at more innovative financial instruments that really try and, where GCF can be like an anchor investment into those portfolios of projects, but then that sort of draws in and more mobilises more finance from the private sector. So I think there will be a shift, perhaps a bit more creativity as well, in trying to bring in more private capital, which I think is going to be essential going forwards for climate finance.
We worked on 2 with private equity partners. Traditionally, when those projects go to the board, at least half the board members are quite how shall I put it, not really enthusiastic about those projects, believing that there's a loss of country ownership there. How did you see those discussions, Zsofia? Because you participating, you were in the corridors as well, behind the scenes, helping some of the partners that we were working with from those private equity firms to fully lean into their GCF experience and the nervousness of the project going to the board. And was there the same type of pushback from board members? I imagine the CSO were pushing back. How do you see that? How did that take place at the board meeting?
Yes, yeah, I did have an expectation that there will be some discussion at the board about these equity projects, partly because they usually come with a pipeline rather than one country, one project type approach, which is very specific. This is a bit less, and also there's some reservation from board members about the private sector role in these in climate action. And but I must say that I was very pleasantly surprised, obviously, because we have been working with these private sector clients, and we know how strong their funds were and how responsive they are to the climate vulnerabilities of the countries they cover and how they make decisions. So that was actually less discussion. Maybe there wasn't. There were probably one of them got a few questions, but not nothing considerable or any. I mean, considerable. I mean, nothing that requires lengthy explanation from the accredited entities. So it was. Quite, it was very pleasant experience. And the CSO did have some reservations. On the other hand, the private sector active observer, was very complimentary with the two funds. So on balance, I think they were well received by the board, and also the ITAP, the process step before the board was very complimentary of the two funds. So
great to hear that, because that perhaps reflects that shift that you were talking about, Claire, that in fact there's a greater realization that we need to use this money, this precious donor money, to mobilize at scale finance. And that's the message you were really giving there from your work leading the Navis project, and getting that really positive compliments from ITAP, really in terms of its climate KPIs and things like that. What would you advise listeners, viewers of this webinar to pay attention to? Because we've got to shift to more private sector, and that's something we emphasize in the Eco Institute training. Got to do more private sector. So if you sign up for that first free course that we've got available in Eco Institute, you'll hear us talking a lot about that. So cut to the chase. What do you see as the key things to pay attention to when doing a project, local level, regional level, international level, like the ones you were working on? What are the key issues to pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot of appetite for investors to want to invest in these kinds of projects, and risk is one of the main things that can put them off. So I think, there's a lot of work that goes in, now when we worked with Navis, for example, a lot of these funds, and we help them work on this, are doing really sort of stringent and strong, like climate rationale screening, programmatic vulnerability assessments. They're really ensuring that those investments are going to be assessing from an adaptation perspective, vulnerabilities in the region. We've also developed an additionality tool to try and demonstrate where those investments can be additional. So I think that whole ecosystem of all those ways of sort of trying to ensure that those investments really add value for climate finance and are really building and developing. And I would say if you're developing a public sector project, to reach out to some private sector stakeholders in the region and start trying to build that bridge with them, because I think we're going to see more and more of this, and there is appetite to get involved. We're just having to be a bit more creative about how we bring those two sides together.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much for that insight, Claire. Do get in touch, anyone watching, with us to talk further about that and how to get the private sector involved to speak their language. Huge thank you to all the viewers on the session, to my wonderful co-presenters here. Thank you, Abiyadan. Fantastic presentation from all of you, from Abiyadan, from Zsofia, from Claire. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Do connect with us. We're easy to connect with. Behind the scenes, there is a fantastic team of people that are working hard to make this happen. Huge thank you to Sandy and Mariella. Nothing would work as smoothly without you, and perhaps it wouldn't work at all without you. So we really do depend on you. You can't see them, but huge thank you for that. You'll find the replay of this video on LinkedIn, on YouTube. You can watch it again if you missed and you joined us later. I invite you to look at our website, www.ecoltdgroup.com. On the Insights section, you can find, this is the 31st GCF Insight. You can download all of them, just filled with valuable information. If you have further questions or comments on the webinar, like to discuss a project you're working on, please do get in touch with me, the team here, or via our website. And we'll see you at the next webinar after the next board meeting, or perhaps sooner at our Eco Institute session on the 21st of May. Thank you so much, everyone.